March 2011. Libyan rebels rise against Muammar Gaddafi. What at first appears to be a spontaneous uprising is in reality the culmination of a carefully managed, top-secret, 30-year-old CIA operation.
The goal here is to get rid of Gaddafi, to overthrow him.
For decades, America has been plotting to remove the man it branded the Mad Dog of the Middle East.
Gaddafi was a chief sponsor of terrorism.
They wanted him out. They wanted to make an example of him.
Because there's evil in this world, and the evil's got to be dealt with.
What few people know as the rebellion against Gaddafi unfolds is that the man leading the uprising is, in fact, a long-time CIA contact.
Khalifa Haftar and his lieutenants were trained by the CIA to remove Gaddafi.
There's a bunch of Libyans, you give them arms, say, all right, go, get rid of Gaddafi.
His relationship with the CIA dates back to the 1980s.
He'd returned to Libya 20 years later to finish a job that was left undone.
Recent investigations reveal that the Libyan rebels are directed and coordinated by CIA experts on the ground. This is the top-secret account of the true extent to which the CIA was instrumental in the Libyan revolution, which took down Gaddafi. CIA headquarters, Langley, Virginia. The North Africa desk is buzzing. They are monitoring secret communications coming in from Libya.
Satellites and electronic surveillance can be collecting huge amounts of communications between any sort of threat to the United States.
The first 387 messages are innocuous. But when they reach the 388th, everything changes. It appears to be a direct threat.
I got intercepts that were clear-cut. It wasn't a question. No one could argue with them.
The intercepted message reads, "Stand by and be ready to attack American targets and execute the plan." The CIA immediately considers it to be an imminent and credible danger. The message emanates from the intelligence headquarters of one of America's most dangerous enemies, Muammar Gaddafi. Since leading a coup to overthrow King Idris in 1969, Muammar Gaddafi has been a tyrannical dictator of Libya.
He'd taken over in 1969 as a very young colonel, and he'd managed to institute a system, if you like, of divide and rule. He made sure that the army high command never grew too strong. He never really had a rival.
Originally, the West had thought they might be able to deal with Gaddafi.
I think there was hope that the U.S. could work with him. And, that rather quickly went away.
Having quelled dissent in Libya, Gaddafi soon embarked on a campaign of murdering Libyan opponents abroad.
He had spies everywhere, both at home and abroad. He very much kept a watch on the exile movement, such as it was.
He wants to get rid of these opponents who have left Libya. And he sends assassination squads to Europe and hires people in the United States to kill members of the opposition.
He had his hit teams out knocking off Libyan, I think he called them stray dogs.
He allows dozens of terrorist groups to run training camps in Libya.
Well, it's often said that he was, the key controller of terrorism or terrorist groups, certainly in the Middle East and maybe to some extent Africa.
Muammar Gaddafi gives money and weapons and passports and safe haven to a number of terrorist groups.
The CIA have long suspected he is actively targeting America.
Gaddafi was seen as the bogeyman because of his sponsorship of terrorism.
They didn't like Gaddafi, they looked at him almost as sort of a, ideological menace.
The CIA know that Gaddafi is behind terrorist acts around the world, including the slaughter of American and Israeli civilians by Palestinian gunmen at Vienna and Rome airports in 1985.
He was a significant enemy to the United States.
For most of my time in CIA, he was a problem one way or the other.
But what makes Gaddafi truly terrifying is his unpredictability.
This mad dog of the Middle East has a goal of a world Muslim fundamentalist revolution.
President Reagan, of course, famously called him that mad dog because Gaddafi's behavior was so irrational at times.
He was sort of he was a lunatic.
The man at times seemed to be unstable, but on the other hand, he was obviously clever, and he played things very well.
Now it seems that the Mad Dog is ordering a direct attack on American targets. The question is, who are the targets and where are they? Later that day, Libyan intelligence officers contact their agents abroad. The message is intercepted by a CIA listening post.
The Americans had managed to basically tap into pretty much all Libyan communications with their diplomatic premises abroad. The Libyans were not nearly as careful about covering their traces as, say, the Syrians or the Iraqis. So the Americans knew that something was afoot.
The CIA discover the location for the attack: Germany.
The communication had been with East Berlin, and the People's Bureau in East Berlin had tipped Tripoli off.
The message from the Libyan embassy in Berlin reads, "Tripoli will be happy when you see the headlines tomorrow." The CIA now have a date and a rough location, but little time to try to stop the attack. The CIA station in Berlin is put on full alert. All they know is that someone, somewhere in the city, is preparing an attack on an American target. Agents are ordered to contact all informants to gather any intelligence about the impending attack. But as the hours pass, their investigations yield little actionable intelligence. In the early hours, at the La Belle nightclub, a spot popular with American GIs, revelers are enjoying their night out. Nobody notices a woman entering the club carrying a bag. Then, in Langley, another message is intercepted. Again, it originates from the Libyan embassy in East Berlin, sent at 1:30 a.m.
The Libyans did that just minutes before this bomb attack took place.
The message simply says, "Happening now."
There's been yet another major terrorist incident, this time in Berlin. A bomb ripped through a nightclub frequented by Americans.
230 people are injured in the blast. 3 will die: a young Turkish woman and 2 US soldiers.
The bombing of the disco in Berlin was a fairly seminal event in that Americans died.
For the first time, the CIA have cast iron evidence that Gaddafi is behind an atrocity against their citizens.
This particular bombing, which killed a lot of innocent civilians, was kind of a touchstone for the US government. They now had some evidence that they could use openly.
There was certainly good information that Gaddafi was behind the Palestinians that blew up the La Belle disco.
There was enough intelligence to indicate that that bombing was not an isolated event. It really was a pattern of operations that Libya was engaging in and was absolutely going to continue into the future, and they would get worse.
This is not a case of picking on some guy to make an example of him. The man wasn't innocent at all. Gaddafi was indeed doing what the Reagan administration was saying that he was doing.
There is such a thing as evil. Today, it is not popular to talk about evil. I mean, There aren't any evil people in some people's minds, but anybody who supports terrorism is evil, and the evil's got to be dealt with.
In Washington, a decision is made. They have to punish the Libyan leader.
It was enough for the Reagan administration to go after Gaddafi. That was the fuse that lit the whole thing.
Dealing with Gaddafi was at the top of foreign policy, from the president down to the executive agencies like the CIA.
The big sea change was becoming more aggressive for the first time on terrorism.
The Reagan administration said, all right, we're going to draw a line in the sand.
They saw it as an opportunity to have a regime change there one way or the other.
The United States felt that it needed to send a signal to these state sponsors of international terrorism.
When our citizens are abused or attacked anywhere in the world on the direct orders of a hostile regime, we will respond so long as I'm in this Oval Office.
There is no question now that America will retaliate. The only issue is how. To lead the fight, Reagan turns to his hardline head of the CIA, William Casey.
Reagan was really looking to establish a much more muscular foreign policy. And he had in his team people like William Casey at the CIA.
Well, Casey obviously was a very intelligent guy. He was a risk taker, and that's different from being a gambler.
He was a very intimidating person if you were afraid of him. He was had a very short temper. He didn't suffer fools lightly.
In many respects, he was a wild man. He had really no time for the moderates, you know, the make nice people.
Casey was determined to do something about Gaddafi.
He was very hawkish, and he wanted to restore American prestige around the world.
Casey suggests a top-secret black operation in which Gaddafi will be eliminated. But getting to Gaddafi will be extremely difficult.
He was a maverick, but he was a maverick with a level of desert cunning, if you like, that made him very, very difficult to remove.
Libya is a military state. Gaddafi is protected by thousands of dedicated troops, including a personal retinue of female Amazonian bodyguards. On top of this, the CIA has barely any agents or assets in the country.
I told them we didn't have the capability or the kind of message they wanted.
Casey also has another problem. Political assassinations have been outlawed in the United States since 1974.
During Watergate, Gerald Ford, the president, issued an executive order banning assassinations by any agency, including the CIA.
Early in his presidency, Reagan had reaffirmed this commitment.
Reagan himself had signed the presidential directive that forbade assassination.
So Casey's hands were tied.
They wanted to remove Gaddafi without contravening that directive.
A covert assassination attempt on an individual may be against the law, but overt military action against the Libyan state is regarded as a legitimate and justified response.
The U.S. response was really a military operation.
The president initiates Operation El Dorado Canyon. Instead of sending in a CIA hit squad, the US will launch airstrikes on a series of military targets inside Libya.
The decision was taken to go after, quote, the command center, unquote.
Both the president and Casey know that the command center is actually Gaddafi's home.
It was a substantial bombing raid against Libya and specifically against Gaddafi, targeting his huge compound in Tripoli.
This is an assassination attempt in all but name.
Now, sitting around that table, there wasn't any winking or, you know, eyes rolling or anything like that about what are we really up to here. Everybody knew damn well that there was a good likelihood that we could take out Gaddafi without, quote, targeting him.
To attack the residence or home of the leader is clearly a targeted assassination, just like if somebody were to try to attack the White House.
What's the hell's the difference if you're going to kill somebody, whether you do it with a single bullet to the head or you do it with a 2,000-pound bomb? I mean, you know, let's not have an argument about it.
For Operation El Dorado Canyon, US planes will launch raids on a series of targets in Libya's main cities, Tripoli and Benghazi. It is up to the CIA to provide the intelligence on the exact locations of the targets for the strikes.
The National Photo Interpretation Center, which belonged to the agency, provided the photography that was used during the planning for which places to attack.
The targets include military compounds, government buildings, and anti-aircraft batteries. But the key target is Gaddafi's command center, a sprawling compound in the heart of Tripoli, which includes Gaddafi's home and a Bedouin tent where he is reported to spend most of his time.
The problem was hitting Gaddafi's command headquarters, which we all knew was connected to his home, if you will, which was in a tent.
The difficulty the CIA face is timing. The bombers need to strike when they can be certain Gaddafi is in his tent. Without agents on the ground, this will be almost impossible to know.
The intelligence available as to Gaddafi's whereabouts wasn't particularly very good.
So Casey turns to Israel.
Israel is a very, very close ally, both politically and in intelligence areas. And so we work with them really as our intelligence and political brothers and sisters, really.
Agents from the Israeli Secret Service, Mossad, set up a surveillance post overlooking Gaddafi's compound. They locate the tent and confirm that Gaddafi is in there. The main contingent of US F-111 bombers take off from American air bases in Britain. As the bombers cross the Mediterranean Sea, fighter planes on US aircraft carriers are scrambled to escort them into Libyan airspace. As the American bombers approach Libya, the Israeli surveillance team confirm that Gaddafi is working late into the night in his tent. Having reported this back, the Mossad agents withdraw. "40 minutes later, the first F-111 jets strike. Casey and other key CIA chiefs are assembled in their offices having a drink as they wait for news.
Casey, I was there, maybe 2 or 3 others, and listened to the information coming in on the particular attack.
Eventually, they've received confirmation that the bombers have hit the Libyan military targets. It seems that the mission is a success, although there is no official confirmation of Gaddafi's fate. Meanwhile, at the White House, the president has assembled his military advisors. An hour into the raid, 2 men arrive at the White House with a videotape in a locked briefcase. They play the tape to the president and the assembled military chiefs. It is the footage from the F-111s conducting the airstrikes. Later that evening, President Reagan takes to the airwaves.
At 7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, air and naval forces of the United States launched a series of strikes against the headquarters, terrorist facilities, and military assets that support Muammar Gaddafi's subversive activities. The
following day, a reconnaissance aircraft is sent to survey the damage.
They put up an SR-71 when they had some daylight, and it ran a mission to actually look at what had happened on the ground.
It confirms that the bombers have hit the CIA's most important target, Gaddafi's compound. It has been devastated, and Gaddafi's tent leveled. But there is still no news on the fate of the Libyan dictator himself. The following evening, news channels break the story that Reagan and Casey had dreaded.
Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Muammar Gaddafi apparently is alive, but questions still far outnumber answers, and mystery still rules 48 hours after U.S. combat jets blasted Muammar Gaddafi's Libya.
Now, in the aftermath of the U.S. attacks, Gaddafi's regime exploits the collateral damage caused by the bombings. Although later proven to be a lie, Libyan news agencies even claim that Gaddafi's adopted daughter is among the 60 dead. The grim truth for the CIA is that the mission has failed.
The results were probably not what anybody expected. They expected better results.
The goal of El Dorado Canyon was to get rid of Gaddafi, and that didn't happen.
Gaddafi was not even injured.
With the door closed on further military operations, CIA Chief Casey must now turn to other means to eliminate Gaddafi.
I don't believe the niceties of how he would be removed from power bothered the Reagan administration. They wanted him out.
Casey now focuses on a classic clandestine CIA method. The agency will foment an uprising of Libyans to overthrow Gaddafi.
In terms of getting rid of foreign leaders who pose a threat, there's always third parties that can be used to do this.
It is a strategy the CIA have employed successfully for decades.
Well, I think having regime change, using covert action as the principal instrument, has been tried a few times, okay?
From Guatemala to Chile, the CIA has covertly supported rebel groups to oust anti-American leaders, providing them with training, weapons, and high-tech support.
When you think about it from an operational perspective, is the best case scenario. The U.S. government doesn't have to get its hands dirty per se, and the third party does it. And if something goes wrong, well, they take the blame for it.
Critical to this sort of action is having the right person to lead the rebels. Casey believes that if he can find the right leader, a Libyan rebellion is the best way to be rid of Gaddafi.
Already there have been efforts about putting together a paramilitary force of Libyans to try and have a little regime change in Libya.
For 7 years, Casey had been secretly supporting Libyan opposition groups in neighboring countries, providing weapons and training. The problem for the CIA is that the Libyan opposition to Gaddafi is divided.
Libya is not a country. It's a bunch of tribes within colonial borders, and what do you do with tribes? I mean, how do you raise the Libyan tribes? I mean, this isn't Lawrence of Arabia.
Casey realizes that he needs someone from Libya who can unite the different factions.
Casey was sorting out who should lead it, which Libyan should lead it or could lead it.
The man Casey is looking for needs to be someone who knows Gaddafi well.
The idea was to get as close to Gaddafi as we possibly could, especially his generals and others would certainly be the target of the CIA.
Eventually, Casey believes he has found the man he wants to lead the Libyan rebellion, Colonel Khalifa Haftar. At first glance, Haftar seems an unlikely choice of leader for an anti-Gaddafi force. He's one of Libya's leading military commanders.
Khalifa Haftar was a professional soldier. His relationship with Gaddafi went right back to the day of the revolution when they overthrew King Idris.
He is a skilled tactician who commands loyalty from his troops. For much of his career, he has been involved in fighting with Libya's southern neighbor, Chad.
He was very much involved in Gaddafi's occupation of a big chunk of Chad, which Gaddafi always had designs on.
Despite leading a fearsome campaign, in 1986, just at the point when Casey was looking for someone to lead the rebellion, the Chadian army regrouped and overwhelmed Haftar's forces.
Several hundred Libyan troops, including Haftar, were captured and imprisoned.
Back in Libya, Gaddafi is furious. His army has been decimated and tens of millions of dollars in equipment lost. He blames Haftar for the failure and leaves his former friend to rot in a Chadian prison cell.
And at that point, Gaddafi washed his hands of the whole operation as if there weren't any Libyan POWs anywhere. And he didn't know anything about the Libyan troops that had been in Chad and had disappeared.
For the CIA, Haftar's imprisonment is a major recruitment opportunity. If they can convince the colonel to turn against Gaddafi, he will be the perfect man to lead the rebel forces. So the CIA activate one of their major assets, the president of Chad himself, Hissène Habré. The CIA have provided substantial support to Habré in his wars against Gaddafi. Now Casey decides to call in the favor. After 7 months languishing in a Chadian prison, Haftar is visited by President Habré.
And it was reported that Habré at one point went to see him.
It is believed that the Chadian president makes Haftar an offer on behalf of the CIA.
Habré offered him the option of turning against Gaddafi, of joining a rebellion, of forming an army in exile, and then marching on Libya.
Having been abandoned by Gaddafi, Haftar agrees to side with the CIA.
Haftar and many like him decided that they would turn against Gaddafi, and they formed the Libyan National Army.
In a classic CIA maneuver, a small force is put together. At its core, the 300 men captured with Haftar. The CIA will arm and train the force with the aim of using them to instigate an uprising in Libya.
The force was certainly trained by CIA people, and the weapons, of course, came from us, and the money and the vehicles and so on and so forth.
The idea was a force would be formed that would be big enough and strong enough to go back and at least begin to sow the seeds of a rebellion inside Libya.
And the United States begins to train Libyan resistance fighters to go back into Libya and overthrow Gaddafi.
Two years on from the US military attacks on Libya, Gaddafi remains strangely quiet. The US believes that Operation El Dorado Canyon, while failing to kill him, has at the very least deterred him from further terrorist activity. But Gaddafi is secretly planning another devastating act of terrorism, which occurs in late 1988. Pan Am Flight 103 prepares to depart for New York from London Heathrow. Among the baggage is the suitcase of a Libyan agent who never boards the flight.
Clearly, Gaddafi didn't give up.
The most dramatic piece of evidence that Gaddafi didn't learn the lesson of El Dorado Canyon is the fate of Pan Am 103.
Hundreds of passengers board, most of them Americans, heading home for Christmas. As they take off, the passengers are unaware that they are in imminent danger. 38 minutes after takeoff, as the aircraft passes over the Scottish town of Lockerbie, a timed device in the suitcase goes off. All 243 passengers are killed, as are 11 people on the ground. Gaddafi has struck again.
We charge that 2 Libyan officials, acting as operatives of the Libyan intelligence service, along with other co-conspirators, planted and detonated the bomb that destroyed Pan Am Flight 103.
At the time, it is the worst terrorist attack ever inflicted on American civilians. After Lockerbie, the whole world responds. Not with bombs, but sanctions. Gaddafi is frozen out. He becomes an international pariah. The CIA, however, remained determined to go even further.
Gaddafi has managed, through his own actions, to put himself at the top of the hit list for the United States.
In Washington, they are pinning their hopes on a revolution to overthrow the man they call the Mad Dog, led by Khalifa Haftar and his CIA-trained force of rebels. Then events in Africa ruin the CIA's plans. In 1990, the pro-American government of Libya's neighbor Chad is forced out and replaced by a new president who is hostile to the US-backed Libyan rebels.
So suddenly you have these several hundred Libyan soldiers sitting in Chad, getting ready to take action against Gaddafi, but the new president of Chad doesn't want them there.
Worse still, the coup had been supported by Gaddafi, and now the Libyan leader wants his payback. Gaddafi knows all about Haftar's army, and he demands that they be handed over to him. Gaddafi wants Haftar dead. The CIA is forced to come to Haftar's rescue.
The Americans come in with transport planes into N'Djamena and remove them. And then this odyssey starts that goes on for the best part of a year.
America funds the evacuation of Haftar's force from Chad in what becomes known as Operation Magic Carpet. The 300-strong group are transported first to Nigeria, then on to Zaire, and then finally to Kenya. But the CIA-backed rebels discover that they are unwelcome in country after country.
Ultimately, the Americans are left with no choice but to bring them back to the US.
The man the CIA want to lead a Libyan rebellion settles in suburban Virginia, only a short drive from CIA HQ in Langley. His men are settled across the country in 25 different states.
Haftar himself, after this long odyssey across Africa, settles in Falls Church, Virginia. He lived in a very nice house, he had a lot of kids, but he still always harbored this idea of returning to Libya.
For the CIA, it is a huge disappointment. But they retain the hope that at some point Haftar's force will be able to regroup and return to Libya. As the years pass, Gaddafi is contained by relentless sanctions and continued international political pressure. Then in September 2001, the kind of threat that Gaddafi poses to the world is placed in a very different context. On September the 11th, 2001, 19 Islamic terrorists hijack 4 commercial airliners and crash them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. It is the dawn of a new age of terror. A much more frightening force than Gaddafi emerges from the shadows: Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is not state-sponsored. It marks a revolutionary shift in terrorism. So America moves to all-out war.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
With the stakes dramatically raised, Gaddafi switches sides.
Well, Gaddafi's change, or supposed change, didn't surprise me, frankly, because he is a total opportunist.
Gaddafi did a remarkable turnaround. Publicly, he came out against terrorism and acts of terrorism, went out of his way to build a relationship with the U.S. government.
Few believe Gaddafi is really a changed man. He is simply desperate to save his own skin.
Gaddafi is afraid of the George W. Bush administration. The administration is talking about weapons of mass destruction. It's focused on Saddam Hussein, but Gaddafi didn't want to take a chance that he would be enemy number one again.
He realized that his plans against the West were going nowhere, and essentially he could lose his government and even his own life.
The one-time mad dog of the Middle East quickly reinvents himself as a valuable ally in President Bush's war on terror.
He makes a strategic calculation and does a deal with the United States. The effect of that is that he becomes a poster child for unilateral disarmament.
Today in Tripoli, the leader of Libya, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, publicly confirmed his commitment to disclose and dismantle all weapons of mass destruction programs in his country.
It is an almost inconceivable change in relations between Gaddafi and the West. Gaddafi, the former international pariah, is visited by a stream of Western leaders. Sanctions are dropped, oil flows out, and money flows in. With the war against Al-Qaeda America's primary objective, and by appearing to have transformed himself into an ally, Gaddafi has succeeded in removing himself from the CIA's hit list.
Gaddafi was never worthy of an American embrace as a human being. Gaddafi's record is horrendous, and that's not a record that you could ever expunge. But American interests in the region changed over time.
In 2009, Gaddafi is even invited to speak at the United Nations in New York. It seems his rehabilitation into the international community is complete. However, in a 90-minute rant to the United Nations, Gaddafi calls the Security Council terrorists, says George Bush should be charged with war crimes, and demands $7 trillion in compensation for colonialism. To the CIA, it is clear that Gaddafi remains as unstable and dangerous as he ever was. Two years later, a new opportunity for the CIA to deal with Gaddafi arises: the Arab Spring. Inspired by revolts in Tunisia and Egypt, popular protests break out across Libya.
In February of 2011, as the Arab Spring takes off, it finally percolates through, if you like, to Libya, and a protest in Benghazi gets out of hand and quickly becomes an uprising.
Gaddafi sends his troops against the protesters, believing no one will interfere.
Gaddafi probably in 2011 concluded that he was going to be okay, that the Americans would not move against him.
But he was wrong. As the Libyan protests grow into an armed opposition, The US joins its NATO allies in providing air cover to protect Libyan civilians from Gaddafi's troops.
Today, I authorize the armed forces of the United States to begin a limited military action in Libya. That action has now begun.
NATO's mission in March 2011 was essentially to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe in Benghazi. It was clear that there was going to be an absolute bloodbath as Gaddafi's forces moved east, and the Benghazi uprising was essentially no more than that. It was just a chaotic popular rebellion that could have easily been suppressed by Gaddafi's forces. But NATO's mission then began to creep. It began to involve hitting anything that Gaddafi had that moved, not just his air force, but anything on the ground that moved.
Under the protection of NATO air support, the Libyan rebel forces are growing in strength and now control much of eastern Libya. But for the CIA, the rebels pose a problem. Some of them are potentially a threat to American interests.
At that point, the Transitional National Council, which is trying to get its act together, trying to form a united front against Gaddafi, is all over the place. There are factions, there are rivalries within the military apparatus.
The worry is that Islamic militants like Al-Qaeda will hijack the revolution. The CIA want to see a military commander they can trust, Colonel Khalifa Haftar, in charge of the rebels.
The Americans want Haftar to go back to Libya, to join the fight, to professionalize the rebellion.
For Haftar, once a senior leader in the Libyan army, taking on Gaddafi is personal.
Haftar, in any case, would have gone. He had never forgiven Gaddafi for the way he deserted him in Chad some 20 years previously, and he wanted to get his own back. He was determined to be part of that rebellion.
One month into the rebellion, Haftar arrives in Benghazi with a handful of his officers to cheering crowds. Within weeks, he is installed as the commander of the rebel forces.
The CIA needed trainers to help this ragtag army that was forming. That's what Khalifa Haftar was there to do, to help organize an otherwise completely disorganized rebellion.
With their preferred man in charge, the CIA is better placed to steer the Libyan rebellion. Haftar is in command of troops on the ground. Now America helps lead the fight from the skies. NATO becomes, in effect, the rebel air force.
There were about 17,000 NATO missions over that summer period. And of course, that needed a great deal of coordination from the ground.
CIA agents from its elite Special Activities Division operate covertly in Libya. They identify targets and call in airstrikes to support the rebels in their war against Gaddafi.
There were CIA operatives there to help the rebels communicate with each other, to plan better, to be able to sustain their advances.
Thanks to this CIA support, within a few short months, the rebel forces take control of key Libyan cities. After 6 months of heavy fighting, the Libyan capital falls to the rebels, and Gaddafi goes into hiding.
Gaddafi disappeared, as did his sons. Nobody knew where the Gaddafis had gone.
The CIA now begins hunting for the Libyan dictator. Drawing on every available source, the agency eventually discovers that Gaddafi has retreated to the northern city of Sirte.
Gaddafi had gone to Sirte with an ever-diminishing band of supporters, but gradually the rebels' noose around Sirte from east and west was tightening.
Gaddafi is surrounded. In the early hours, a convoy of vehicles attempts to break out of Sirte.
In the skies above, NATO assets had been patrolling for a long time, and they were able instantly to see this unusual activity.
The CIA scrambles a reconnaissance drone and scan the airwaves for communications, desperate to find out if Gaddafi is in the convoy. Agents then receive vital intelligence. A call from a satellite phone is intercepted from the convoy. The CIA confirms it is Gaddafi.
Gaddafi makes a break for it in a convoy of dozens of vehicles trying to get out of Sirte.
The CIA now alerts United States Air Force drone commanders in Las Vegas who launch a deadly Predator drone from a base in Sicily to intercept the convoy.
In no time at all, Hellfire missiles are raining down.
The drone's missiles slam into the convoy, while NATO fighter jets bomb from overhead. As rebel forces advance on the ground, Gaddafi is forced to make a break for it on foot.
Gaddafi is discovered, dragged out, beaten, and thrown across the hood of a car.
The rebels turn into a baying mob. They unleash a murderous revenge upon Gaddafi for 4 decades of oppression. His body, beaten and bloodied, is paraded as a trophy.
That was the very demeaning end to a man who had ruled Libya for 40 years, who had regarded himself as a prophet, really, for the Arab people.
For the CIA, Gaddafi's death is a triumph. They had always had him as a target, and although it had taken 30 years, eventually their plan has worked.
Haftar and his lieutenants were trained by the CIA to remove Gaddafi. The fact is that instead of helping to remove Gaddafi in the late 1980s, they came back 20 years later and finished the job.
The CIA has been instrumental in removing Gaddafi in what, until now, the world believed was an entirely Libyan uprising.